I love Star Wars. And Shatterpoint, the new Star Wars game, is coming out this Friday, 2nd of June 2023. If you're watching this in the future, it's coming out this Friday for everybody to get. But I got a core set early. And in the last video, I painted terrain. This video, I'm supposed to be painting all the figures and bases. Newsflash, I don't paint that many of them. These take a long time. They're beautiful sculpts. They're big sculpts compared to most minis you paint. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And I'm also painting my 4 favourite characters probably first. So prepping and painting this project took 10 hours. 10 whole hours. And I didn't really even finish a quarter of the pack. Don't worry, this video isn't that long. But let's get going. First up, you'll need the online instructions. For all of those that don't like online instructions, let me tell you, this was a good thing because there were errors in the terrain. I pointed them out in that video and they have fixed them for everyone following afterwards. So besides the instructions, you'll need nippers. I normally have 2 sets. A nice fine set for close-up, but a thicker set to take things off the sprue. The fine set are side-cut nippers by Despy. You'll need Tamiya extra thin cement. You'll need some sanding sponges, metal files, all that kind of malarkey for getting everything cleaned up. And that's it. Time to get going. So first up, use your nippers to remove any items that you need for one figure at a time from the sprue. I normally cut further away to get them off the sprue, then getting closer when I can move them around and drop them to tidy them up with the side nippers. And then I use a metal file to get rid of any remaining nub. Now I know some people use an X-Acto blade, but I tend to cut into things rather than scrape well. When everything is tidied up, out come the instructions and I just build parts together as per the instructions. It's worth saying that sometimes you need to leave them on the side for the glue to go off. I'm using Tamiya extra thin cement, as you can see here, and it does it by melting the plastic a little bit. It takes time for that bond to set up. So once you've got things put together, it's definitely worth putting them on the side and letting them dry properly. If that's taking too long, go cut out the pieces for the next figure. There's plenty of them to go. Quick interlude on bases. I don't generally glue my figures onto bases before I paint them. And I did actually glue these on because I'm just going to paint the base, whereas normally I'd put a treatment on it and I want the figure to be higher than the base, so I don't glue them on. It's odd though, I glued them on after I'd assembled them, so some of the feet aren't quite level, which is normally fine on a lumpier base like I do. And I also have to admit it was really hard to paint Ahsoka's skirt when there's a giant base underneath. But if you want to put them on bases, now is the time to do it. I use these, I think they're 20mm by 2mm office magnets. They're self-adhesive, but that's useless. So I add some extra hot glue. They were just the right height really for these Shatterpoint bases. I hot glue them underneath with some wax paper and then the metallic object that it's going to be stuck to, it's like ferromagnetic sheet, put that underneath and it drags the magnet down and the hot glue fills the gap. I like to magnetise my bases. I've got a whole set of 3D printed magnet trays that these will go onto, and although I did them for Legion, they'll work perfectly well for Shatterpoint too. Time to clean up all those mould lines and nubs that you've missed. Now, some of you are looking at this video going, but Kathy, I can clearly see that you are airbrushing here. You're not cleaning up models. But I actually find it easier to spray a coat of just a primer. This is Mr. Surfacer 1500 white. It puts a nice clean surface on and it makes it much, much easier, I find, to see any issues with your models. So that's what I'm doing here. And I also took the opportunity to spray black around the base of my models because I'm going to put a black coat on next when I start painting for the edge of all my bases. So now it really is time to clean up all of those mould lines. And if you don't know what I mean, when you first look at a sculpt like this, it can look really good. But if we look at this jetpack flame, you can see there's a line down it, and we need to get rid of that. I generally use metal files, but you can use sanding sponges. It's just these are smaller and easier to get into all the gaps. And don't forget to look at the feet too, especially if they're on show. I reprimed the areas I just filed off, and then I spray painted white on the clone troopers. It's MS White by Mr. Colour, so it's slightly greyish. I also did the rims of the bases in Misted Colour Tire Black. So now I have all of these, but I don't have time to paint them. So I picked my favourite 4 Ahsoka, Captain Rex, and 2 501st clone troopers before getting going with the colours. Now I just used 4 colours for almost all of this. There was 1 spot of fluorescent green on her wrists for Ahsoka, and that was it. Just these 4 colours. We just painted the white part of the armour, but it's time to do the black undersuit, and it's really fine. So I like to use this panel liner by Tamiya. It flows nicely into all the cracks, and you can clean it up with a bit of white spirit, because it's enamel, and a cotton bud. Using the same solvent range, I then painted oils into the sort of larger areas that weren't quite covered by the enamel panel line. Now I use Starship Filth for that, I never use black. And I also dilute it into a wash. I've got bottles of it, as you can see. And I went over all of the white areas just to tone them down a bit. They're a little bit too shiny, and my clone troopers aren't shinies. And then I put them on the side to dry for a couple of days whilst I painted Ahsoka. I've not been a mini painter in the past. You know, when you're doing small HO scale things, they're barely visible. But I've had to up my game, and one of the things I did was make myself a wet palette. I think I may treat myself to a proper one day, but this is some sponge, baking paper and water in a container. And that's it. All I do is squeeze out my paints, my 4 colours, and get painting. I'm using a 1/00 brush. It's nice and long so it holds paint, but it's got a beautiful thin tip. And I painted almost everything with it. It's sometimes easier to paint with a bigger brush with a sharper tip because you can get it into places. One of the problems though is it does hold paint up the side, and sometimes I'd knock the side of it onto bits I'd already painted. But apart from that, there is a lot of painting of base coats. I am mixing the intense blue with the black grey to tone down the blue and come up with the kind of navy that Ahsoka has. Now this is actually the 4th time I've painted an Ahsoka in this particular outfit. In fact, it's the only outfit I've ever painted her in. So I know pretty much what I want to do. There's navy of varying shades on the legs, there's grey boots, there's grey little side skirts and markings on her skirt, and then there's grey detail on her top. So I painted all the base coats. I also put orange on her arms. Now this isn't the right orange. I've added a little spot of blue into it to just tone it down so it's a little bit more desaturated. Now picking all these out takes a lot of time. It's several hours, and you can see it running on that little project shot in the background. And when I had everything up to a certain level that I felt everything was painted at least once, I needed to kind of sharpen the edges slightly. And for that I put on another oil wash. Again, Starship Filth just sits in all those cracks. It will dry overnight, so I can paint over it tomorrow, but you can't paint over it till it's dry because it just resists the acrylic. But I do love adding layers of oil washes in because they're just so much nicer than acrylic washes. But the oil washes are dried on the clones, so I picked out and cleaned them up with some white. I picked out the highlights with white, but also sometimes the washes just dry a little dirty and you need to clean them up a little. Back to Ahsoka, and this time it's white paint for the markings on her face. Now these are beautiful sculpts and the markings are actually moulded in, which makes it far easier than when I freehanded it the last time. But it's still quite hard doing such small, tiny pieces. I've tried magnifying glasses. To be honest, she was just out of focus half the time when I was doing this. It was difficult. I find this stage is now just a mix of painting each colour in turn, trying to tidy up any areas that just don't quite have the right colour on them. I probably had a bit of problems around the edges of the greys, the light greys, and I should have painted everything the navy and then just gone over the highlights of the light greys, because I did have some sides that were still white. But I fixed all that, and I also added in some lights, just a slightly lighter colour, onto the tops of the creases on her skirts, on her bust, and shoulders, etc., just to show a little bit of highlighting in her clothing. There's a dab of green on her wrists, and the grey's got some highlights too. Onto the Montrals and Leku. These are a blue. It's the same intense blue, but with a spot of white in it, so it's not as bright. And then just white as well to clean up any areas that I might have got wrong. It's all moulded in. You just need to count the stripes and make sure you're painting in the right place. But it is still very fiddly and takes quite a bit of time. But isn't that the fun of mini painting? That it takes time? Her lightsabers are light blue at this point in the series, so they got another coat of light blue. This is actually a fluorescent blue mixed in rather than the intense blue. I don't think it made much difference. But I've got to say the face looks naff. It needed something bringing out the depths in it. I'm not sure, this was probably a little heavy. It's a dark grey wash. It's actually enamel panel liner. And I used a brush to just tidy it around. Whilst it's a little heavy, it sat in her white markings on her cheeks a little bit too much. But what it did was ring the whites I put on the eyes. And I had put a little dot of darkness in the centre, but it wasn't the best effort. I'm really suck at faces, to be honest. That's why I prefer helmeted clones. There we go. It's almost there. It's probably as good as it's going to get. Back to the clones. And by now, even Captain Rex's J guys on his helmet, which are thankfully moulded in, they seem quite easy by comparison. So the main things to paint on him are his karma, which is his fancy skirt, which is mostly just black with a blue rim, and his arm and leg markings, and then his helmet. So I just quickly put all that together. The nice thing about white armour is it's easy to tidy up any extras that you've missed, such as here. And also, I did the guns, I painted them in black grey, and later on I dry brushed a sort of slightly brighter grey over the top to just bring out the details. His skirt and pauldron got some details to make them not look like they're just completely painted one flat colour, just a little bit of highlighting and perhaps texture. Sadly, my helmet painting video was slightly out of focus, so I reenacted it for you so you can see what I did. Basically, I used a very fine brush and painted the lines. I also put on the tally marks, there's black and white ones, and I remembered, which is what I did when I went back and reenacted it, I remembered I hadn't done the weld marks on the side of his chest armour, so got those in too. Now that blue is way, way too blue. So what I needed to do was just tone it down a bit. And for that I used dilute white paint. It just eats away with the scuff marks and scratches and makes the edges slightly less distinct, just like in the real anime. I then counted up my tally marks and realised I was missing 10 on his helmet, nothing but detailed here, and added his arm and wrist ones. A few more highlights, and he was getting close to done. The other two clones were done exactly the same way, and if you can spot who they are, they're two of my favourites, then put it in the comments below. These are going on a lava board, so I decided to paint these bases with lava. I kind of wish I hadn't, because I ended up doing OSL, which I don't really like, and yeah. But anyway, I painted the insets white so I could put some nice glowy orange in there. The bases are just grey, and I used a dark grey enamel panel liner to add depth to the cracks. To paint the glowing lava, I painted white first so the colours above it would show up, and then I painted the bright orange. I find the fluorescent orange I'm about to use just is a bit thin, and it doesn't really show without a normal orange underneath. When that was dry, I painted on some sort of glow around the edges with yellow orange. It's a bit brighter, and I also put it back into the cracks to really show that this was nice, bright, glowing lava. And then I did something I didn't really want to do. I painted some OSL, object source lighting. This lava is very glowy. It'd be wrong if it wasn't reflecting off the shiny white armour, but I hate painting light onto minis. It's just not how I think. So I did it anyway, and now I've got orange all over the underneath of Rex, and he's always going to have that base as lava. I can't repaint it black now. And I'm not sure, I'm just not sure. But anyway, let me know what you think. I'm not a fan, personally, of the way it came out, but, you know, that's just me. a final coat of black enamel wash in those deep cracks, and I left it overnight to settle. The next morning I'm still regretting the lava, and it looks just a little bit too shiny. A matte varnish will sort that in a minute, but first I decided to add just a little bit of brown enamel wash onto it, just to bring out some of the detail and make it look like there may be some flowing lava under there. Yeah, just felt a bit too glowy otherwise. And when that was dry, I put on a coat of matte varnish, Mr. Colour, it's Mr. Finisher, UV cut flat, just to protect everything. And here we are, the final result. Many layers upon layers. I'm still not sold on that OSL, if I'm honest, that sort of orange glow on the figures, but it's there now, and short of painting it out, which I may well yet do, it's there. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I know some of you will love it and some of you will hate it, but that's the nature of YouTube comments, isn't it? And remember, subscribe, like, hit the bell button, all the usual things. If you really want to go the extra mile, then support me over on Patreon. And I do need to thank Asmodee UK for sending me the core set that's featured in this. Thank you so much, it's been great fun doing it, and I've still got loads more to do. Lava board, lit up lava board coming next time. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to leave you with these, and don't forget to put in the comments below whether you like the OSL and if you can recognise these two clones. One of them's easy, one's a bit more of a test perhaps. See you next time.